ostensibly were using metal chisels that were softer than the stone that they were perfectly carving, which is, of course, stupid. So the claim there in Tiwanaku, and when I say the claim, I mean it's like they tell you this is the way it is, and the people who tell you that have guns strapped to their sides in Bolivia. That's the way it is. I mean, it is locked down. That is the narrative that they force upon you. Now, in Peru, it's not. That's what they believe in Peru, but they're not nearly as militaristic about it. But in Bolivia, if you go to Tiwanaku, I mean, it is forced upon you. In fact, they have what I believe are English-speaking informants walking around listening to what your commentary on the stones, and that's what we ran into. And of course, my commentary on the stones was that these are pre-flood. These are very ancient, thousands of years old. Now, what's interesting is this. We surmised in Tiwanaku that we were only looking at the tip of the iceberg. If you're in Tiwanaku, and you can see this in our first film, Technology of the Fallen, you'll see where they've excavated. And you can see the ancient aliens. They go to Tiwanaku, make a big deal out of it. You know, aliens built it and so forth. But they don't even, and let's talk about that for a second. Ancient aliens, these guys go over there, and I respect some of these guys, David Hatcher Childress and Brian Forster, and some of these guys. I admire their work to a degree. I think they're coming to the wrong conclusions. However, I agree with at least some of what they put forward. But they're sitting on top of these ruins, in some cases measuring them, right, with their tape measures and so forth, and their squares, and talking about aliens must have built these. But what they're not talking about are two things. Number one, obviously, Tiwanaku, as well as Sacsayhuaman, was devastated in a great flood. Period. I mean, it's a done deal. Both of those sites were submerged, and they were submerged beneath the waters of the ocean. They were devastated in a great flood. Okay, that's number one. Number two, both of those locations, both of the ruins and the ruins in both locations, Sacsayhuaman in Peru and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, are primarily under the ground still to this day. The vast majority of what those sites were at one time is still buried beneath the sediment that was deposited during the flood. Now, I say that so definitively because I have proof. And when you're there, I mean, it is so ridiculous how in Peru and Bolivia, the claims that they make, it's absolutely ridiculous, and how they force them upon you. Again, in Bolivia, they force them upon you in a very militaristic way. In Peru, they're not so aggressive. And so I surmise that what we were looking at in Tiwanaku, what was on the surface of the earth, these big megalithic blocks, was just the tip of the iceberg. And that if you look around at the landscape, if you're standing in Tiwanaku, Bolivia, and you do a 360, and you know anything about the mounds and the mound builders in the United States, by the way, the mound builders in Sardinia, and the pyramids that are still covered with sediment, pyramids covered in sediment that people call conical hills. Archaeologists refer to some of these as conical hills, when in fact they're megalithic structures. All over the world, by the way. And you look around in Bolivia, and you feel like you're looking at hills and mounds that you get the sense are artificial. You get the sense that that's a pyramid, that's a structure, and they purposely are not digging it up. And if you're in Tiwanaku and you look at the excavations that they've done, they went 5 feet down and stopped. And you can see these large megalithic stones protruding out of the ground. And my thought was, why did they stop? Why? Why did they stop? So they just uncovered the tip of the iceberg, and then they fabricate this ridiculous story about pre-Columbians who built it without the use of the wheel, with soft metal chisels, deer antlers, ropes, and other ridiculous stories such as that. And, again, we surmise that the majority of this thing is under the ground, and there's a reason why they don't want to keep digging. Well, I talked to a guy named Anselm P. Rambla in our film in The Unholy Sea. I interviewed Anselm P. Rambla. Anselm P. Rambla is an explorer and a researcher, and he takes a professional team of archaeologists and other professionals with him, especially to South America. He does a lot of work in South America, but not exclusively South America. By the way, he's a Spaniard. He's from Spain. They go and they do excavations in some of these places. And he actually was, and by the way, he's the one who confirmed the existence of the Chincana beneath the Coricancha, the existence of the underground tunnels in Peru. And he confirmed it scientifically with ground-penetrating radar, and he saw it with his own eyes with some of his team members. That story is laid out in our film. But what we don't say in our film, for those of you who have seen our film, this is something I don't say in the film, which I probably should have, is that during my conversations with Anselm P. Rambla, he revealed to me that they had also done an excavation in Tiwanaku. They went in with ground-penetrating radar. They were allowed to do an excavation. They were able to get the permit for it. And he said, Tim, he said, you wouldn't believe what's under the ground at Tiwanaku. He absolutely confirmed exactly what we had suspected. He said the vast majority of what is there is covered in sediment and buried beneath the earth, and they will not dig it up. This comes from a guy who was there excavating with ground-penetrating radar. And they only allowed him to go so far, and he proved it with his excavation that the whole thing is still underground. Why did they stop? The same question can be asked of Sacsayhuaman, the famous walls of Sacsayhuaman, which we feature in our film and that are outside of Cusco. It's a fact. And again, Anselm P. Rambla proved this by doing excavations with archaeologists, doing excavations using ground-penetrating radar as well, that the vast majority of the Great Walls of Sacsayhuaman are buried beneath the earth. So everybody looks at the walls of Sacsayhuaman, all these learned archaeologists, institutional archaeologists and historians, and they come up with these stupid ideas of how the Inca built it. And they're not even looking at the vast majority of this massive complex. It's already unbelievable, the story that they fabricate about how these things were built, without even seeing 90% of the construction. And he proved unequivocally that the Inca did not build the walls of Sacsayhuaman, because all you have to do is do a cursory excavation at Tiwanaku and at Sacsayhuaman, and you're going to discover the remains of cultures that pre-existed the Inca. I mean, end of story. The Inca didn't build it. These other cultures were there first, and they certainly didn't build it. The Inca were great builders, by the way, just like the Romans were great builders. But neither the Romans nor the Inca nor any other known culture were capable of building Cyclopean megaliths. None of them. And so you have to ask yourself the question, how is it that such a technology that can withstand the tempests of time, a technology that has withstood earthquake after earthquake, when all the other edifices come collapsing down around them, these Cyclopean megaliths stand fast? How is it that a technology so beneficial to mankind suddenly disappears from the earth with no record of how to build it, with no record indicating what kind of technology was involved? Well, there are only two answers. One, the great flood of Noah decimated these edifices and destroyed the civilizations that they were associated with and the technology. That's one. Or the other possibility is that it was that the destruction happened in a pre-Adamic time, and that these edifices belong to a pre-Adamic dynamic. I'm okay with either answer. So if we state, which we do, these are pre-flood constructions, we're right on both counts if they happen to also be pre-Adamic. And one more thing, you mentioned, David, the fact that people are beginning to use the stars, and appropriately so, to date these constructions, these megalithic sites. And in every case, you're coming up with thousands of years. Not hundreds of years, thousands of years when dealing with the megaliths. And I asked Anselm P. Rambla, who moves in the archaeological circles, and I asked him if the archaeological community, why are they so aggressive in terms of the denial of these obvious realities? And he actually told me that there's a new breed of archaeologists that are now putting more confidence in the dating. I forget what it's called, David. I don't. It has a term, using the stars to date these to date things on the earth, as above, so below.
Yeah.
But this new breed of archaeologists is actually putting more stock in that at this point than in carbon dating, because it's turning out to be more accurate.
Yeah, there's now